Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. I'm Dr. Dawson, and in today's video, we are going to ask a question and answer a question that you probably didn't ever ask. But that question is, what happens when you mix a buffalo with a beef cow? So we raise Beefalo, which is a fairly unique breed. Basically, Beefalo are a hybrid between the American bison and a cow. So you can see that probably on screen right now. This breeding was first recorded back in the mid-1700s. However, the first intentional crossbreeding didn't really occur until the mid-19th century. Now, early attempts at hybridization were thought to produce only sterile offspring. However, there were a few reports where people had non-sterile animals, and specifically bulls were much more likely to be sterile than cows were. Eventually, it was decided that a lower percentage bison tended to produce a better animal as far as temperament goes. There was a big boom about Beefalo in the 1960s and the 1970s, and it was supposed to be one of the next big things in animal agriculture. However, it faced some challenges with acceptance in the cattle world, as it wasn't easy to produce new hybrids with new genetics, and it was a fairly small genetic pool to begin with. The other challenge is that the marketing wasn't done very well. Consider the Angus Association and how well they did their marketing. I mean, if you go to just about any restaurant or fast food joint, you're going to see Angus on the menu specifically. The other challenge is that there are minimal consistent genetic differences between cattle and bison. And so some of the Beefalo that have been produced don't really show any of the genetic markers for bison. And so even some Beefalo that are Beefalo aren't able to be registered with the Beefalo Association. And this makes a significant challenge within the small genetic Beefalo community and makes it difficult to market it well. So my family started raising Beefalo in the early 1970s. My grandparents started purchasing and working with Beefalo and started with some frozen semen from one of the original bulls whose name was Dan's Pride. I tried to find a picture of Dan's Pride, but I was unable to find it at this time, and that's probably because most of the marketing material of that time hasn't been converted to digital images, and so most of it's still on paper, and I just don't happen to have a copy. So we started with Dan's Pride, and since then we've been adding genetics, subtracting genetics, changing and breeding lots of different animals. And in the early 2000s, we were down to approximately 2 Beefalo cows. And at that time, we had a decision to make. Do we look more into this Beefalo, and do we continue rebuilding the Beefalo herd, or switch to something else, or potentially be out of cattle altogether? And thankfully, my grandfather decided that Beefalo was the way to go, and so we've been breeding back to Beefalo ever since. And right now we are selling most of our animals through custom slaughter, meaning that people will buy a quarter or a half of the cow that's being butchered or the steer that's being butchered and pay for processing and pick it up at the butcher. We also do sell our genetics, and that is mostly in the form of bovine semen or sperm. And our best bull is White Knight. He is, I believe, 10 or potentially 11 years old at this point, which is pretty old for a bull. And most bulls in the beef industry at least end up breaking down from their weight at 4 to 5 years of age, or end up needing to be switched out of the herd because of inbreeding potential if you continue to breed to the same bull year after year. But we don't use him on our herd all that often, and if we do, we make sure that we're not doing any inbreeding. And so far, he's been incredibly healthy as far as bulls go, and we've been very happy with him and his calves. The disadvantage of White Knight is that he's not able to be registered with the American Beefalo Association because of some technicalities, which is unfortunate, but it's the way things go. So some of the advantages of this Beefalo, or the bison hybrid, which is about 3/8 bison and the rest is going to be domestic cattle. The advantages are pretty cut and dry. They do much better in extremes. They do much better in the cold. They do much better in the heat. As far as the cold goes, they have a lot smaller and finer hair, and so they're able to withstand the cold significantly better. And as far as heat goes, they do very well because they actually contain sweat glands, or at least many of them do, which normal cattle don't. And so they're able to do very well in these extremes. Some of the other advantages as far as herd management goes is that they generally have a lot smaller calves than many other breeds, and they have very long reproductive lives. And one of the biggest advantages is that they do well on poor forage. So if you think of the American bison, they did very well on the empty grassland or in the forests where they didn't have great pasture. The same goes for Beefalo to some degree, maybe slightly less, but they tend to do significantly better than a traditional beef cow on poor forage. Now, some of the dietary considerations, so some of the advantages of Beefalo meat versus normal beef. The USDA did some studies in the late 80s about Beefalo meat, and they found that they tend to be much higher in protein than traditional beef, chicken, pork, and even fish, and a lot lower in cholesterol than chicken, pork, or beef. And one of the other big dietary advantages is that they're a lot lower in fat than pork or normal beef traditionally. Now, you can raise the percentage depending on what they're being fed. So a corn-fed Beefalo cow is still going to have higher percentage than a grass-fed Beefalo cow. But they do a lot better at decreasing the amount of fat, increasing the amount of protein, and even lowering the amount of cholesterol compared to most of our other animal-based proteins. So now that we've talked about some of the advantages to Beefalo, we're now going to kind of talk about some of the things that make it a challenging breed and some of the disadvantages. So one of the major challenges with Beefalo is that there's a lack of new F1 crosses, meaning that there's very few new breedings between cattle and bison. And the other challenge is even if those are successful, which is very uncommon, we tend to have difficulty with their offspring being fertile, especially on the bull side. One of the other really challenging parts is that the American Beefalo Association has had a very limited marketing effort in the last 20 years. And that lack of marketing support has really hurt the expansion of the breed. And that's just really difficult to overcome on an individual farm level. There is some marketing, and I'll probably post a couple articles below that mention it, but Beefalo in general, it just has not had the marketing support of many of the other breeds, such as the Herefords or the Angus Association. And so we don't see a lot of people building new genetics, and so our pool to pull from is incredibly small. One of the other major disadvantages and difficulties is that depending on the percentage of bison, you can have differences in temperament and fertility. So, for example, this white bull behind me with the horns and the one in the background, the other white one behind the black bull, both of them are at this point infertile, and they're 2 to 3 years old. We've been hopeful, but they are out of a bull called Magnum Gold, who is 75% bison, and they were bred to our Beefalo cows. But Magnum Gold's calves, the females are fantastic, they're usually fertile, and we don't have a lot of problems with them. However, the bulls tend to both be infertile often, and they tend to just not grow quite at the same rate as a lot of our other Beefalo. And this isn't a challenge just with the bull Magnum Gold. This is a problem with most of our high percentage bison bulls. The closer they are to that first F1 cross, the more infertile the bulls tend to be. And so we just have to overcome that one at a time, and it just makes it very difficult. We very much have enjoyed the breed of Beefalo and have enjoyed working with them and working on our genetics and trying to build a herd that's diverse, but also very valuable from the standpoint of continuing Beefalo genetics. We've had 3 or 4 animals in recent history that we just couldn't manage because of their temperament, and they ended up having to leave the farm for the sake of safety. But most of our cattle, especially the cows, you can just about go up to and pet in the pasture. And yes, we do sell most of our animals for meat, but they're very well taken care of, and we do our best to do low stress handling, and we do our best for each of them as far as their health and welfare goes. And in the future, I'll make another video that probably addresses a lot of the problems and some of the specific questions that you guys are going to have about using animals for meat in general. So talk about the meat industry and welfare and all veterinarians' role and all of that. But I don't think that's a problem for today. I think that's a problem for a different day. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and hopefully you've got to enjoy some of our beefalo here in the background as we film, and hopefully you guys will see us in the next video. Have a fantastic rest of your day.